I thought I'd covered everything: school shootings, political scandals, even domestic terror drills. But nothing prepared me for what happened that morning in Minnesota. A man in a police uniform knocked on the door of a state lawmaker and opened fire. Within hours, 2 were dead, 2 more wounded. And before anyone knew his name, the internet had already decided his motive. They said he was a Marxist, a leftist, an Antifa hitman. But that was a lie, a deliberate one, spread by verified accounts, senators, billionaires. The truth: he was a radicalized minister, armed with faith, fury, and a hit list with 70 names. This is the story of what he did, and how the narrative that followed did something even worse. I'm not here to sensationalize. I'm here to show you how misinformation can bury a massacre, and how, in America, sometimes the lie survives longer than the blood on the floor. So if you think you've heard it all, you haven't. Hit follow on your favorite platform now, because the next story might just change the way you see everything. Don't miss a single twisted turn. Chapter 1. The knock at the door. I remember exactly where I was when the call came through. It was just past 5:30 a.m. on Saturday, June 14th, 2025. My phone buzzed against the glass of my nightstand, a breaking push alert lighting up in all caps. Active shooter situation in Brooklyn Park, police responding. Brooklyn Park, Minnesota. A quiet suburban city known more for family barbecues and clean cul-de-sacs than chaos. I'd covered local politics in that district for nearly 8 years. But this didn't feel like a typical domestic dispute or another overnight carjacking. Within minutes, a second alert came in from Champlin, just 4 miles northwest. Second shooting underway. State Senator John Hoffman critically wounded. I was already pulling on my jeans when the third notification arrived. Rep. Melissa Hortman and husband confirmed dead, gunman at large. Everything after that moved like static. My press badge shook against my chest as I drove northbound toward the first scene, still tying my ponytail at red lights. This wasn't just another shooting. This was a political execution. Scene 1, Brooklyn Park. 6:08 a.m. I arrived to flashing red-blue strobes lighting up the entryway of a 2-story colonial on Russell Avenue. A sheet covered 2 bodies just beyond the front steps. A man and a woman. A senior officer, someone I'd spoken to dozens of times before, pulled me aside. "It's them," he said. "Melissa and Mark. Dead at the door." Melissa Hortman, Speaker of the Minnesota House. Her husband, Mark, was a longtime policy advisor. From what I gathered later, they'd heard a knock around 5:15 a.m. He was dressed as a police officer. Tactical vest. Silenced pistol. Body cam. They opened the door, probably thinking it was official. It was the last thing they'd ever do. Scene 2, Champlin. Less than 15 minutes later, and just 10 minutes away by car, a second 911 call came in from Dayton Road in Champlin. Senator John Hoffman and his wife Yvette had both been shot, but survived. I later confirmed with HCMC that Hoffman took 2 rounds to the lower abdomen. Yvette, 1 to the arm while shielding her husband. They played dead until he left. That decision saved their lives. The connection: 2 separate attacks. 2 prominent Democratic lawmakers. Same weapon caliber. Same witness accounts. An armed man in a police uniform, face partially obscured, driving a dark SUV with a police decal and red-blue dash lights. By 7:15 a.m., law enforcement confirmed the attacks were connected. By 8 a.m., the FBI had joined the manhunt. What none of us knew yet, not me, not the officers, not the victims' families, was how premeditated this nightmare really was, or how deeply manipulation would contaminate every headline to come. Public panic. By mid-morning, every major outlet was broadcasting split-screen images of both crime scenes. Police blocked access within 2 blocks of each home. Neighbors were interviewed in hushed voices. Children peered from bedroom windows. I was the first local journalist allowed past the second cordon at Russell Avenue. I saw the blood on the welcome mat, the bullet hole through the screen door, the uncollected newspaper lying just beyond the porch, dated June 14th, 2025. A date Minnesota will never forget. And somewhere out there, the shooter was still loose. In those first few hours, the public didn't know his name. They didn't know what drove him. But already, speculation began to spiral. Twitter, Reddit, Telegram. Was this a political hit? A coordinated terrorist act? Or something worse? By noon, I'd filed 3 live reports, 5 internal memos, and 2 off-the-record phone interviews with shaken political staffers. I hadn't eaten. I barely drank water. But I remember one thing crystal clear. This wasn't just a double homicide. It was a message. And someone went to great lengths to deliver it. In uniform, with silence, and at the doorstep of democracy. We didn't know it yet, but we were standing inside the opening act of a new kind of manipulation. One that used bullets for punctuation and lies for legacy. Chapter 2. The Man in the Mask. There's a moment in every investigation when a name emerges, and everything tilts. For us, that name came shortly after 3 p.m. on June 14th. An internal memo leaked to regional press confirmed law enforcement had identified the suspect. Vance Luther Boelter, age 57, last known residence, Belle Plaine, Minnesota. Status: armed, disguised, extremely dangerous. That name didn't ring any bells. Not to me, not to my colleagues, not even to many in state politics. But the minute I began digging, a different picture formed. A slow, chilling arc of a man who had once served institutions before turning against them. Who was Vance Boelter? Boelter was no stranger to Minnesota's civic life. A licensed funeral director, founder of a private Christian-based security firm, and years ago, an unpaid appointee to Minnesota's Workforce Development Board, named under both Democratic governors, Mark Dayton and Tim Walz. His name had faded from public listings after 2020, but what happened in those 5 years between then and now would become the core of my reporting. People who knew him, and I tracked down more than a dozen over the following week, used words like soft-spoken, polite, faithful. A man who opened every town meeting with prayer. A man who once led grief counseling at a Lutheran church after a local drowning. But that was the old Boelter. The man who showed up on June 14th wore something else entirely. The disguise. At both crime scenes, survivors and neighbors described the same detail. Police-style tactical vest. Navy blue windbreaker with police patch. Utility belt. Badge-shaped insignia. Silenced 9mm pistol. Body camera. Unmarked SUV with police-style dash lights. And, most chilling, a silicone mask resembling a white middle-aged officer. He had studied every detail, gait, cadence, how to knock, what words to say. He used tactical distraction, knocking once, stepping to the left, obscuring his shadow. This wasn't a spontaneous act of violence. It was a performance, and it had one goal: to make his targets open the door. Faith, fury, and radicalization. In the days after the shooting, I spoke with a former member of Boelter's prayer circle, a woman named Linda. She asked for anonymity, but agreed to record her account. He changed during the pandemic, started talking about the enemy within, using phrases like child killers and Lucifer's party. We thought he was just mad about abortion stuff, but then he stopped coming to church altogether. Digital forensics later uncovered an encrypted Telegram account linked to Boelter. Posts included anti-abortion manifestos, conspiracy theories about satanic rituals in government, and admiration for vigilante acts abroad. He had moved from evangelical minister to ideological soldier. The police cosplay complex. There's an eerie subculture online, mostly forums and gear sites, dedicated to what insiders call Elio mimicry. Civilians dressing as law enforcement, down to the weight of the boots and the stitching of the tactical shirt. Boelter owned 3 complete law enforcement uniform sets, 2 silicone facial masks, 4 radios modified for fake dispatch signals, 1 SUV modified with dash lighting, siren, and internal camera systems. These weren't Halloween props. These were tools of infiltration, tools of trust. It took Boelter 2 years to perfect his disguise. It took him less than 30 seconds to execute 2 of the most targeted political killings in Minnesota history. He wasn't insane. He was intentional. After his arrest, I heard a rumor, one later confirmed by a senior DHS official. Boelter remained calm during interrogation. Unshaken, legal, calculated. I waited, he said. I prayed. Then I did what had to be done. No wild eyes, no rants, just conviction. When I first looked at Boelter's record, I saw what the public might. A small-town servant turned radical. But now I see something far more unsettling. A man who studied his enemy, wore trust like a costume, used the image of law to bypass resistance, and transformed performance into execution. He knew the suit would open doors. He knew the badge would quiet suspicion. And he knew, in the age of mass confusion, that appearance still trumps truth. Chapter 3. The Hit List. The public learned about the hit list 2 days after the shootings. But I saw it before most reporters did. A source inside the Joint Federal-State Task Force, someone I'd known since the Floyd protests, sent me a 3-word text at 6:47 a.m. on June 16th. You need this. Attached was a redacted image of a handwritten document photographed inside the suspect's vehicle. Lined notebook paper, 10 pages thick, labeled across the top. Operation Righteous Strike. The handwriting was crisp, block-lettered, methodical. No scribbles. No rants. Each page listed names, locations, affiliations, and perceived offenses. Targets grouped by ideological category. Democratic lawmakers. Abortion providers. Judges who ruled in reproductive rights cases. State-level LGBTQ advocates. Media figures. Federal politicians, including Governor Tim Walz and Congresswoman Ilhan Omar. In all, 70 names. Each one written with the kind of penmanship you'd expect from a man who once comforted widows and signed death certificates. Inside the manifesto, beyond the list, a typed document was recovered from a thumb drive found inside a sealed envelope labeled, "To the Rightful Court." The title, "The Failure of Democracy and the Justification for Divine Action." 59 pages. Boelter outlined his justification using scripture, constitutional misreadings, and moral absolutism. Phrases like "the unborn cry out for vengeance" and "the time of reckoning is here" repeated throughout. He referred to politicians as wolves dressed in ballots. There was no profanity, no chaos, only the chilling order of a man who saw himself not as a criminal, but as a vessel. Law enforcement reaction. During a press briefing that evening, FBI spokesperson Meredith Graham gave a carefully worded statement. "We have recovered material indicating a broader intent to harm multiple individuals. The document's ideological content is currently under federal review." That was it. One sentence. No names. No details. But I knew what they weren't saying. This wasn't just a hit list. It was a blueprint for ideological terror. And it wasn't finished. Digital traces. Federal investigators found browser histories, bookmarked extremist forums, and chat threads on encrypted messaging apps. His accounts followed and engaged with high-profile far-right influencers, including anti-abortion militants and white nationalist organizers. More disturbingly, surveillance footage and metadata confirmed he had driven past 3 other targets' homes weeks prior, including a Planned Parenthood in Duluth and the residence of a Hennepin County judge. He wasn't improvising. He was rehearsing. Why these targets? I interviewed a political analyst who specializes in domestic extremism. She told me, Boelter wasn't just choosing names. He was constructing an ecosystem of blame, political, legal, cultural. Anyone he believed enabled reproductive freedom or sexual deviance became part of his theology of punishment. And it wasn't just Minnesota. Addresses in Wisconsin, Iowa, and Illinois appeared on his secondary pages. He intended this to be multi-state, multi-day, multi-body. If he hadn't been caught after day 1, we might have been looking at the largest ideological killing spree in modern U.S. history. Media silence. Despite this staggering discovery, major media outlets spent less time covering the manifesto than they did reacting to a viral misinformation campaign, one that began even before Boelter's name was released. The hit list should have been front page. It wasn't, because a lie, one tweet from a sitting U.S. senator, had already derailed the national story. And that manipulation, that intentional pivot away from fact, is where this tragedy took a darker turn. I keep a printout of one of those pages beside my desk, not to sensationalize, but to remember, because behind every name on that list is a human being, with a family, a routine, a favorite cereal, a pet, a political view. They were marked for elimination by a man who cloaked his mission in righteousness, a man who believed the world needed cleansing, and that he was qualified to do the scrubbing. And for a full news cycle, his truth was buried beneath someone else's lie. Chapter 4. The lie that went viral. By Sunday morning, less than 24 hours after Vance Luther Boelter executed a dual political attack in suburban Minnesota, I had confirmation of his identity, his hit list, and the federal task force now handling the case. But the internet? The internet had something else entirely. The tweet that lit the match. At 10:04 a.m. on June 15th, U.S. Senator Mike Lee of Utah posted a photograph of Boelter dressed in his makeshift police uniform, face obscured by the silicone mask, taken from law enforcement surveillance footage released to help the manhunt. He captioned it, "This is what happens when Marxists don't get their way." 16 words. No facts, no sourcing, no context. Just a claim, posted to his 1.8 million followers on X, formerly Twitter. It caught fire in under 15 minutes. By 10:30 a.m., it had been quote-tweeted by Donald Trump Jr., who added, "Antifa terrorist dressed as a cop. You can't make this stuff up." By 11 a.m., Elon Musk had commented beneath it with a single word, "Suspicious." And by noon, the lie had metastasized. The false narrative, constructed in real time. Without even knowing the suspect's name, right-wing influencers and pundits had constructed an entirely fictional persona for the shooter. A Marxist activist, affiliated with Antifa, connected to Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, possibly on the leftist payroll, committing violence to stop the passage of a conservative crime bill. None of it was true. Not a single word. Boelter wasn't a Marxist. He wasn't on the left. He wasn't affiliated with Walz. In fact, his political rage was directly aimed at the governor. He was a pro-Trump, anti-abortion, anti-LGBTQ, far-right extremist who had once led prayer groups and owned a funeral home. But the lie was sexier, simpler, politically useful, so it spread fast. Digital wildfire. By 3 p.m., my newsroom tracked more than 42 million impressions across right-wing accounts sharing the Marxist killer narrative. Facebook memes, YouTube hot takes, Telegram echo chambers, Reddit speculation threads, all of it rooted in fabrication, anchored by Mike Lee's original post. A post that, by then, had already been deleted, but the screenshots had gone immortal. I tried tweeting corrections. I published verified background data. I contacted editors at national outlets begging them to pivot coverage. It was like screaming into a jet engine. The emotional toll. That Sunday, I visited the scene of the second attack in Champlin, where Senator John Hoffman and his wife Yvette had survived. I met neighbors with MAGA bumper stickers and Gadsden flags. One man asked me if it was true that the killer was BLM. Another said, "They say Walz hired him to fake an attack." Is that true? This wasn't just confusion. This was disinformation weaponized, injected directly into grief, into fear, into a public desperate for meaning. The manipulation worked. Pushback, too late. PolitiFact and Snopes published official corrections on June 16th, confirming Boelter's identity, ideology, and political alignment. Senator Tina Smith called out Mike Lee on the Senate floor. Amy Klobuchar condemned the distortion. Even Republican lawmakers in Minnesota issued a joint statement refuting the claim. But by then, it didn't matter. The damage had been done. The narrative, the fake one, had already baked itself into the brains of millions. Why the lie worked. I interviewed a behavioral psychologist the following week. She said something that still echoes in my notebook. People aren't looking for truth. They're looking for confirmation of the truth they want. Boelter, a real domestic terrorist, had committed a real political killing. But the truth didn't offer catharsis. The lie did. I've covered misinformation before. But this was the first time I watched it murder reality in real time. The manipulation wasn't done by Boelter alone. It was continued and magnified by verified accounts, blue checkmarks, public servants, billionaires, and media brands. The bullet wounds were real, but so were the narrative wounds. And in a democracy, both can be fatal. Chapter 5. Debunked but not deleted. By Monday, June 16th, the facts were finally catching up. Boelter had been arrested the morning before, located by thermal drone surveillance near Green Isle, Minnesota. He surrendered without a fight. Inside his SUV, agents found 3 firearms, tactical maps, and a printout of his hit list. Law enforcement publicly confirmed everything we already suspected. His ideological extremism, his pro-Trump, anti-abortion motives, his religious justification for the killings, and the complete fabrication of any link to Antifa, Marxism, or leftist activism. But as the facts clarified, the narrative did not. Because what spreads fastest on the internet isn't truth. It's frictionless belief. And by the time the truth arrives, the algorithm has already moved on. The fact-checking machine engages. PolitiFact issued a correction article on Monday morning titled, "No, the Minnesota shooter was not a Marxist. He was a far-right extremist." Snopes followed with a more aggressive headline. Senator Mike Lee shared a false claim about Minnesota shooter. Here's the real story. Major national outlets updated their reporting. Some issued quiet retractions. Others embedded editors' notes beneath their original headlines. Still, millions of users never saw the correction. On X, the original viral posts were deleted or quietly shadowed. But not before screenshots and memes had already immortalized the lie. The Senate floor showdown. That same day, Senator Tina Smith of Minnesota stood before Congress and directly addressed Mike Lee. Her voice shook, not with rage, but something worse, disbelief. Senator Lee didn't just spread misinformation. He did it before the facts were known, and he did it knowing the weight of his platform. That's not a mistake. That's malice. C-SPAN footage of her speech gained traction, but not nearly as much as the original viral lie. In fact, during a segment on a far-right news channel that evening, Smith's comments were framed as an attack on free speech. The headline read, "Democrats try to silence dissent in wake of tragedy." Behind the digital curtain, I reached out to a data analyst at the Stanford Internet Observatory who had been tracking Boelter-related keywords across major platforms. She told me the most staggering number. As of June 17th, 87% of all Boelter-related engagement online was still tied to the false narrative. 87%. Even after the arrest. Even after the facts were published. The lie was simpler. It had heroes and villains. It demanded no nuance. And that's what made it stick. The damage to democracy. I later spoke with a staffer from Representative Ilhan Omar's office, one of the names on Boelter's hit list. She told me Omar had received over 2,000 threats in 72 hours. Not because she was nearly assassinated, but because people believed she orchestrated the shooting. Let that sink in. A sitting congresswoman, marked for death, was now being blamed for her own targeting. This isn't politics. This is psychological warfare. Why corrections fail. In journalism school, we're taught that a correction is an act of integrity, an essential part of the truth-telling process. But in today's media landscape, corrections are whispers in the wake of a gunshot. You can fact-check a tweet, but you can't fact-check momentum. Not when the lie already became a meme. Not when it affirmed someone's bias. Not when the wrong story just feels better. Final reflection. That week, I printed out 2 documents and pinned them side by side in my home office. On the left, the PolitiFact correction, a dry, accurate, well-sourced piece of journalism. On the right, a meme of Boelter labeled Antifa hitman, still being shared on Facebook by the thousands. One told the truth. The other told a story people wanted to believe. And until we understand the difference, we will keep losing to lies, even when we're holding the truth in our hands. Chapter 6. Trial by Narrative. By the time Vance Luther Boelter stood in front of a judge on June 20th, 2025, the world had moved on. The news cycle had rotated 3 times, to a celebrity divorce, a Supreme Court leak, and a tropical storm heading toward the Gulf Coast. Even my own newsroom had reassigned 2 reporters away from the Boelter case. But I stayed on it, because beneath the silence, something far more disturbing was happening. Boelter wasn't just being tried in court. He was being tried and redefined in the public imagination. The facts were stable. The story was not. The charges. Federal prosecutors charged Boelter with 2 counts of first-degree murder, Melissa and Mark Hortman. 2 counts of attempted murder, Senator John Hoffman and wife Yvette. Multiple counts of stalking interstate officials. Unlawful impersonation of law enforcement, weapons trafficking, and violation of federal anti-terrorism statutes. His defense attorney, a court-appointed federal public defender, entered a not guilty plea, not on grounds of innocence, but on grounds of mental instability and ideological compulsion. The courtroom was quiet. Boelter sat with his hands folded, jaw still. He didn't speak, but his manifesto had already said enough. Media apathy. No major networks aired the arraignment. The gallery was only half full. No candlelight vigils. No marches. No hashtag campaigns. This, a politically motivated double assassination of elected officials, was now background noise. Why? Because the false narrative had done its job. It confused. It polarized. And then it exhausted. In the end, no one wanted to touch it. Not the left. Not the right. Too dangerous. Too divisive. Too hard to explain. Boelter's silence. Federal transcripts revealed that Boelter waived his right to a psychological evaluation. His only public comment to investigators was this: "I gave them a chance. They chose evil." He never named they. He didn't need to. His list said enough. The government's terrorism unit classified him as a lone actor with delusions of divine mandate. And yet nothing about his preparation was delusional. He planned like a soldier. He moved like a spy. He killed like a man who believed God was watching and nodding in approval. The manipulation complete. Here's the most terrifying truth I uncovered. By the end of June, more people believed Boelter was a left-wing extremist than a far-right one, despite every available fact. I know this because I commissioned a regional poll with a nonprofit media watchdog group. The question was simple. Do you believe the Minnesota shooter was politically motivated by left-wing or right-wing ideology? 52% answered, left-wing. A man who literally tried to assassinate pro-choice politicians in God's name, who had a written hit list, a personal manifesto, and an online trail of MAGA-aligned extremism, was remembered by most as the opposite of what he truly was. That's not just misinformation. That's narrative capture. That's cognitive hijacking. That's master-level manipulation. What justice looks like now. The trial is set for federal court in September. The death penalty is on the table. But even if he's convicted, even if he's executed, the public memory has already been rewritten. And that's the part no judge can sentence. Final reflection. In this job, you get used to tragedy. But what I witnessed in this story wasn't just death. It was the death of clarity. A man disguised himself as a cop and murdered politicians. Then a narrative disguised itself as truth and murdered the facts. And in the end, both weapons hit their mark. We often say journalism is the first draft of history. But in this case, it wasn't. The first draft was a tweet, and history may never correct it.